Yay, we're live. Awesome. Hello, everyone. And hello, Katie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you? Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too, and lovely to see everyone who's watching us today. So, today we have a brilliant session that I'm personally really excited about. But before we jump for it, I have an exciting announcement for everyone. I'm sure you've already seen it around, but if you haven't noticed, we are getting close to the super early bird tickets of Cambridge Social Media Day 2021 going up. So, the super early birds are available only until Monday, the 31st. So if you loved our last year's event, if you're new here and you don't know what this is all about, once a year we throw together an incredible conference all about social media, all about marketing for small businesses, practical, lots of networking, brilliant talks, ask me anything sessions. It's a ball. It will take place over 2 days on the 19th and 20th of October. It will be virtual, so you can take it from the comfort of your home. And yeah, we would love to see you there. I'll share a link to the tickets in the description. But I just wanted to let you know that we have this amazing offer available until Monday, then the ticket price will go up. But I will start bothering you with my offers and with my pitches. And I will go to the lovely Katie, who will talk to us today all about social brain. What is it? How does it work? Why should you care? So, Katie, the floor is yours.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. Okay, let me just get my screen sharing so you can hopefully see all my lovely slides I've created.
Yes, we can see your slides.
Fantastic. That's good. Thank you very much. Yeah, so what I want to talk to you about this afternoon is this concept of neuromarketing, which really brings neuroscience into all the different fields of marketing. And it's a game changer. And I don't use those words lightly, but it really is completely shifting the way we think about marketing. And certainly I propose it should change the way we approach some of the marketing decisions that we made. I've been in this field for 12 years now. So although it's emerging now, it really was only very embryonic when I started. But the beautiful thing about neuroscience is it's evolving so quickly. And that's really what neuromarketing is. It's applying neuroscience, that is the knowledge of our brains and nervous system, to the field of marketing. So let's start with introducing you to your brain. Because although your brain knows everything about you, I don't know how much you know about your brain. So I think they are the most incredible, fascinating, amazing organs. They are still the most complex computational processes that we are aware of on the planet. To give you some idea, they suggest that an average adult makes somewhere in the region of 35,000 decisions a day. And your brain is making those decisions with you, for you, accessing relevant information to help you make those decisions. And obviously, in the field of marketing, some of those decisions are going to be about products or services that we want to engage with or buy. In order to do that, there are 86 billion neurons in the brain. And these neurons communicate with each other using tiny messaging neurotransmitters. You may have come across some of the neurotransmitters that I'll talk about later on. But it's an incredibly busy brain that we're talking about. And it's as busy, in fact, it's fractionally more busy when we're asleep than it is when we're awake. So all of this is incredibly intense in terms of resources. And to give you a demonstration of that, the brain on average weighs about 2% of your body weight. And yet that organ consumes about 20% of the energy that you take in. So even though it's only 2%, it is literally consuming vast amounts of energy just to keep your system going all the time, to keep the information processing. So I said neuroscience is quite new, it's emerging, it's evolved. People have been trying to study the brain for a long time, and this is one of the tools they would have used historically if they wanted to find out what was going on in the brain. Yes, although I like to convince myself it's a sort of industrial size corkscrew, I'm afraid it's not. This is probably everything you are dreading it being, which is it is a screw for drilling through the skull so you can actually expose part of the brain. And the difficulty with studying the brain is even if you expose it, it doesn't actually reveal much. So the brain, when it's at work, doesn't show us anything from the outside. Actually, if you think about some of the other organs, so our lungs would inflate, our heart would be pumping, the brain doesn't reveal anything. So we've had to wait for technologies to improve to really enable us to look at what's going on inside the brain, and critically for us to be able to study the brain of people when they're alive, because many of the tools and techniques we originally developed were only possible for slicing brains or analysing brains post-mortem. And funnily enough, people don't volunteer for research if that's what you're proposing to do. So what we have now are some much better technologies, and you can see a sample here of some images which have been taken through using something called a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. So the MRI machines that you may be familiar with and be aware of, these machines enable us to get subjects to carry out studies while they're inside the machines, and we can then see where they are taking resource into their brain. So which parts of their brain are working hardest, what regions of their brain are engaged in completing that particular task. And so this has been revolutionary for the field of neuroscience. Now, not all the neuroscience work that we do uses these. There are some other technologies too. This is it's incredibly good, it's incredibly detailed and sensitive. However, it's also quite invasive. So asking people to come into a lab and be strapped down to a table where they have to lie still is not particularly convenient. And I have to say it's also extremely expensive to get this sort of information. So what we use are some other tools in which we have in our toolbox. They are things like using EDA, which is electrodermal activity, or you may know it as galvanic skin response. So these are sensors that you can put on 2 fingers. And from that, you can tell from the change in the conductivity of the skin, whether people like what they see or not. One of the other things I also use is an EEG headset, which is electroencephalography, and that is a headset that you put onto people which measures the electrical activity within their brain. And you can tell by which parts of their brain are being stimulated, how they are responding again to what they are seeing. Now, the beauty of a lot of these neuroscience techniques is that they cannot be influenced or controlled by us. So these are responses which are physiological, they are automatic, and they convey a huge amount about the way our system is interpreting what it sees around it. So these are not open to the normal sort of skews and biases that a lot of conventional research is. The other great thing about this is that actually what we can do through these, or through utilizing these different techniques, is actually quite different. Because the conventional wisdom says that around 15% of what goes into the decisions we make is information we're consciously aware of. That's 15. So the other 85% of what goes into the decisions we make is information that is subconscious. It's not information we are consciously aware of. So these are things that we may have emotions, we may have memories. There's all sorts of different elements which go into making those decisions. And our brain uses things called heuristics, which are just like shortcuts to navigate their way through. If you can imagine those 35,000 decisions we're making every day, if we had to sit down and debate and think about every single one of those, it would be paralyzing for us. So the brain uses these heuristics, which it has learned over time, as a method of saving some of that resource to enable us to apply to other things. So that's really what we're looking at when we use neuroscience, is these physiological responses, because we can pick up on the physiological messages and the physiological changes and they convey a lot more information to us than just that 15% we're consciously aware of. So I've said the brain is fascinating and it's great, and you can probably tell I think it's a very impressive part and needs to be studied, but it's not perfect. And although I think it's got tremendous strength and tremendous knowledge that we can still discover, I want to just let you know that, or just to remind you, that this isn't as it was designed. The way our brains work today has evolved, and it's happened mutation by mutation, just the same as these guys here. One post at a time, they have created a situation which I'm sure was never their intention at the outset. And that's the same with our brains. They have evolved, they have adapted. And so the brains that we have today aren't necessarily how they would be if you sat down with a piece of paper and said, what do we want our brains to be like? How do we want them to work? So our brains really are trying to enable us to cope and survive in a world that they're not suited for. In fact, I quite often use the term that we are running on caveman software. And although we would love to think that we can upgrade these, and we are learning a lot about neuroplasticity and the way the brain can evolve and adapt and the way it learns, and it can provide alternate routes and pathways, sadly, there are still some elements within the brain that it seems are not plastic, and there are some elements that are very much hardwired into us. So what I want to do this afternoon is give you a sense of what we've learnt in neuroscience about our brain, which is particularly relevant to marketing. And in particular, I then want to give you some areas where I think this can be made more directly applicable for social media content. Now, the great thing about social media is that there's a huge amount of neuroscience gone into actually bringing people onto social media on a regular basis. So the debate about how addictive social media is tends to center around dopamine, which is it can be seen as an addictive response in the brain. So it's very much about pleasure and anticipation and the rewards that we get, or the rewards we think we're going to get. And if you haven't seen it before, I highly suggest you watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix, because that explains and demonstrates quite a lot about the way some of these social media platforms really apply neuroscience to get people to come onto them on a regular basis, and critically to keep people engaged once they are on. So that's useful for us in that it means we don't have to encourage people to get there so much. What we need to do instead is switch our focus to how we can actually stand out. So when people are scrolling through, when they've got this constant stream of feed in front of them, how is it that we can stand out? So what I want to do here is talk to you about 3 cognitive functions which I think are most applicable. So the first one is going to be about perception. Now, I'm sure we've all seen this trainer. If you haven't seen this trainer, I'm sure you've seen that dress. These viral instances of questions which cause huge debate. Is that grey and turquoise, or is that shoe pink and white? And perception is a really important part of how we receive the information that is presented to us. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit about the way perception works, and then hopefully that will help you to understand some of the recommendations I'm making about how you enhance perception or how you employ it within your social media content. Second one is attention, because once we've noticed, or once we've got lots of information about what's going on in the environment around us, some of that will capture our attention. And this is the second stage for us in terms of social media content, is how do we encourage people to actually take note, to stop scrolling or to stop swiping, so that actually what we're showing them captures their attention, literally. So again, I'll explain a bit about how attention works and give you some hints on how you can apply that. And then the final part, almost the holy grail for some of us in marketing, is the area of memory. Because we want, if people aren't instantly interested in the products or services we buy, we want them to be able to recall us or to think of us when the opportunity arises. So the third of these cognitive functions I'm going to look at is memory. Okay, so to start off then with perception. Now, although perception is a very sophisticated process within the brain, it is actually made up of a series of interpretations. So the world as we think it is around us isn't necessarily the way the world really is. What happens is our brain pieces together information from all the different senses and it relays it to different regions within the brain. And from that, it then creates a holistic picture. So actually, it's a very sophisticated process, but it does have flaws in that pulling together process, because again, it works on the basis of experience, what works well in the past, and also sort of best guesses. So please do remember that perception is not actual, but it is very much an interpretive process. One of the best senses in terms of responses in the brain is smell. And I don't know if you've experienced that yourself, but the smell of somebody's perfume, or it might be the smell of a wax crayon or a particular shampoo that just takes you back. It just is so powerful. And that's because the olfactory processes activate the amygdala and the hippocampus, which the amygdala is the basis of emotions, and the hippocampus is where most of the memory function within the brain starts. So whereas other regions of other senses, the information that they present coming into the brain go to different regions and they have to be collated and then they will access the amygdala and the hippocampus, olfactory, that is smell perceptions, go direct there. So that's why sometimes they can be the most powerful. However, that's probably not a huge amount of help to you in terms of social media. I'm sure there's people working on it as we speak, but obviously the ability to smell things hasn't happened yet. I'm not even sure I want that, just thinking about some of the stuff we get on social media. But so actually what we're looking at is vision, and almost 90% of the processing systems and mechanisms we have within the brain are based around vision. So it's a huge part of the brain and it dominates many of the other senses in some situations. So the way vision works, I'm sure some of you will have covered this at school and remember it, but it's actually that the light comes in through the front of our eye and it's captured on the surface on the back of our eye, which is called the retina. And actually this retina, although we think of it as a screen, or I was certainly taught at school that we think of it as a screen, it's actually not. It's actually a surface that's made up of millions of tiny rods and cones. And these rods and cones will receive particular bits of information. So some of them will receive information about wavelength of light, and that is then translated into understanding colour in the visual field that we have present before us. All the information that these rods and cones receive is then transmitted down the optic fibres within the brain, and it goes through to the processing area, which is the occipital lobe right at the back of our brain. Now, it's a beautiful process. It divides things up. So one part of our occipital lobe will give us information about movement. One part gives us information about texture. So there's some very complex processes which are taking place, and they all happen remarkably fast. On top of that, the brain then pulls all this information back together again to make sense of what is going on in our visual field. So rather than leaving us with disparate experiences, it pulls all of that back to create the sort of fluid, constant view of the surroundings that we have going on almost all the time. The other part, just to mention about perception, is of course that actually the information that we get gets switched over, and it's a very clever process where the information, because most of us as humans, we are binocular, so we have two eyes, and they will give us lots of information, and the angle of the two eyes focusing on something gives us information about depth. The information from the left side of both eyes goes to the right hand side, the right hand hemisphere, and the information from the right visual field goes to the left hemisphere. And it's thought that that then makes it easier to correspond with things that are in the visual field, then tie up with the motor systems for that half of the body, because the left hemisphere controls the right hand half of the body and vice versa. So there's a lot going on in terms of perception. And as I say, it's happening all the time. This is part of the exhaustive process that your brain is doing, is making you aware of what's going on, scanning around all the time, processing information from our environment. So let me think about how this actually works. Firstly, as I've said, it is not a flawless process, which is how we end up with some of these optical illusions. So the lines you see before you, the horizontal lines, are actually straight, but they don't appear it. And that is because the information that our brain is taking in and trying to make sense of, it defaults, it tries to use previous experiences and mechanisms which actually tell it that those lines are at different angles and they're wider at one end than they are at the other end. So we can fool some of these heuristics and these perceptual processes within our brain. We also have some processes which appear to be hardwired into us. So we form things into shapes and patterns, and faces are one of the really strong examples of those. So this is a condition called pareidolia, which I'm just doing some research on with Unilever at the moment, which is looking at how the brain responds when it interprets a series of things into a familiar shape of a face. So this demonstrates that quite often what our brain is doing is looking for those patterns and looking to make sense of objects by not just considering them in isolation, but actually considering them together in that wider picture. And as part of that wider picture, we need to be acutely aware that some of what goes into the perceptual processing is based on context, is based on the environment we're in. So if you were walking down the street on a Tuesday morning and you hear a loud bang behind you, you might be startled. You probably do your natural response, which is to turn your head and try and work out where that bang has come from. If, however, you were walking home at 11:30 at night from the cinema, having just watched a horrific thriller horror film, and you hear a loud bang behind you, your response would be quite different. So you may go into a real fight or flight, defensive stress response, as well as either turning to see what it was or maybe more likely running rapidly away from it. So the same stimulus can actually create very different responses depending on context. And that's, again, what the brain is doing when it's processing, is trying to make sense of all of that going on around it. Next element I want to look at is attention. So as I say, it's about helping us to select from all of this information which is coming in all the time. So if I drew your attention to the sensation of the seat beneath your bottom, or perhaps your back is leaning against it, you would suddenly be aware of that. Now, that sensation was always there. Your skin receptors were always being stimulated by that, but your brain thought it wasn't important to give dedicated resource to that right now. You know, that is constant, therefore we don't need to worry about it. If all of a sudden your chair creaked or gave way under you, all of your attention would be drawn to that. So it can vary depending on what the brain feels is important at the time. So it's really trying to help you and select out what it thinks is most necessary for you to know. And a lot of this is based on survival. So, actually, what is going to be a threat to us? What do we need to be aware of that's going on around us? If you hear somebody mention your name, your attention will be drawn to that because, again, it's a factor we want to know what's going on. Attention is also getting much, much shorter. If we look back at film industry, for instance, so back in the 1940s, when Gone with the Wind was released, the average shot time for a film was somewhere in the region of 26 seconds. Whereas now that's down to less than 10 seconds. And I think the Bourne Supremacy had an average shot time of just over 4 seconds. So we are living in a world where the attention demands are getting higher, and actually our attention span is getting shorter. And I think, as you think about people scrolling through social media, we can see this. And when you look at the conversion rates of video, we know that people want it to be short, digestible amounts. The great thing about attention, though, is we can direct it. We can show people. We can literally help people and point them at what we want them to know. So I'm going to hope this works, because I've got a video for you to watch just demonstrating this point.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted. It is available for use in talks, training, and teaching on DVDs from VizCog.
So I don't know whether some of you have seen that before or not, but I always think it's a really interesting way to demonstrate that actually we can miss something as big as a person in a gorilla suit. So we have this opportunity to direct people's attention, and some of the key ways that we can do that, firstly, are if we use movement. Remember, our attention is drawn to things that we think are going to help us survive. So if we suddenly see something moving, we need to locate it. We need to focus in on it and make a decision about whether it's threatening to us or not, whether it's the first sign of the ceiling falling in, or whether it's somebody running towards us or throwing something towards us. Movement is really powerful. So if we can use that, then we know we're going to capture people's attention. We also have contrast. So again, part of our survival is noticing things that are different, or noticing things that stand out, and using that as a way to calculate what threat levels are. And then the third thing we can do is actually direct people. And we can use arrows, we can use people's gazes. So there's lots of ways that we can encourage people to look in particular directions. And I love this example here, because not only are they encouraging you to look in one particular place, but they're also demonstrating the fact they know that we are all going to fall for this and we're going to look in the wrong place. So I think that's a great way of engaging with your audience too, and demonstrating the empathy and the understanding that you have. Third element then is memory. And memory is a huge topic area. Within that, it contains things that are fleeting. 3 things that you need to get from the shop as you're walking down there, right through to memories that can last an entire lifetime. They can be things that we are concentrating hard to remember. So you might be really trying to recall that person's phone number or what you came upstairs to do. Or they could be flashbulb. And by flashbulb, we mean things like, if I asked you where you were on September the 11th, 2001, even though that's nearly 20 years ago, many people could tell where they were, what they were doing, who they were with, and what happened during the course of that day, because the intensity of the attacks that took place on September the 11th created a flashbulb memory in people's minds who were living at the time. Now, when we study memory, we have a bit of an issue because we have to make sure that we are really focusing in on the right aspect, because if somebody is not able to tell us something, we have three possible ways that it could have gone wrong. It could be either the encoding of it as a memory, so how it was stored, how it was filed. It could be actually something that has happened to it during the storage, or it could be an error in retrieving it, so an error in actually getting it back. And this makes it a very complex area to study. However, we are starting to see some of the foundations of the way that memories are laid down, and this is obviously extremely interesting for us working on brands and looking at how we build up associations that people have with brands. I did some research a couple of years ago where we were asking people to look at a number of different website layouts, and we also asked them to carry out conventional market research at the end of it. So which website layout did they like best? Which ones could they recall? And it was lovely to see that the pattern of responses, so the way the sensors picked up their response in the brain when they first looked at the website, was absolutely replicated when they were asked to recall it. So it really does seem like we're starting to get some of these first hints as to how those foundations are laid by that information being recalled and replicated in the brain at the time of being asked about it. Some of the best ways that we can use memory, or we can trigger people to lay down memories, is to get them to work harder. And using cognitive engagement, that's the physical application of some effort, really does help us in terms of being able to create those memories and create more of a legacy and more of an impact within the brain from the content we present. Emotions as well are very powerful, so we can use those to pull on memories. So we can use images of childhood to encourage people to feel nostalgic about things. Or what we can also do is bring in a real mix of senses. So we don't just show something, we talk about the way things might smell, or we talk about the way it would touch it would feel if you touched it. One of the other great areas that we've learnt through memory is we actually were able to answer the Pepsi challenge. So I don't know if any of you remember the Pepsi challenge, but it used to be a blind taste testing that people were asked to do to see if they preferred the flavours of Coke or Pepsi. And Pepsi always won these blind taste testings, and yet it never converted into actual market share. And when you do this under neuroscience study, what you actually realise is that when people are drinking Coke, there is so much emotion that goes into it. And we talked about the amygdala earlier and the hippocampus, but all of that is really activated and really firing. Whereas with Pepsi, it doesn't have anything like the same intensity. So we feel as though what we're seeing is that when you do it blind and you don't know what you're drinking, you judge it just based on how sweet it is. And the brain is again hardwired to prefer things that are quite sweet because they are often foods that would have been hard for us to find. But when you bring to it all the branding, all the association, then Coke is the one that has the strongest impact within the brain. And of course, when we're in the supermarket making our buying decision, we have that visibility about which brand it is that we want to buy. So just a few points then. In terms of social media content, I really think the critical thing is to be very clear about what you want the person to be in terms of their emotional state. So when they're engaging with your content, how do you want them to feel? Is it something that you want them to feel motivated to act, to be energized? Do you want them to feel calm and as though they've got time, they've got space, you can just bring them down from a bit of an intense high? Do you want them to feel that actually they're resourceful, they're empowered? If you start with that emotion, it can then give us a number of choices and options that we can play with. So I've got 9 hints and tips and things here for you, which I think should be quite useful. Firstly is, once you've identified the emotional state, really apply a lot of these to it. So things like colours and brightness can be tremendously powerful. If you think that Colour is a spectrum and it's marked by wavelength. And remember those rods and cones I talked about, they respond to different wavelengths. So red is a very urgent, a very energizing, it's a very impulsive, and it stimulates. So red is highly stimulative, which is why lots of brands in the fast food industry use it, because it gets you to eat quickly and to leave. So fast food places really enjoy it. Conversely, the opposite end of the spectrum, blue is a very calming and it suppresses a lot of people's impulses. So Tokyo, their underground or their equivalent of the underground system, they changed all the fluorescent lighting in there to a blue-based colour. And they actually found that suicide rates dropped by 74% just by changing the light, because it reduces people's likelihood to act on impulse. So what do you want them to do? What do you want your customers to do? Do you want them to be impulsive and fired up, or do you want them to be more contemplative and diligent and to think things through? Be intentional about attention. So I've shown you a few examples of ways that you can get people's attention. So how are you going to capture that? How are you going to use it? What do you want them to direct them to do? What are you going to point them at? And even by showing people's faces who are looking at something or directing, with their eye line, we will naturally follow other people's eye lines and see what they're looking at. So all of these are ways that you can actually use that attention in a more deliberate way. We like to feel part of something, and social media has really enabled this, perhaps like no other platform before. The oxytocin in our brain, which is released when we feel connected or we feel like we've bonded, is phenomenal. And again, it's a behavior that we want to repeat and we want more of. So using groups, using communities, creating memberships, having challenges that people go through together are all really powerful ways of being able to feed this need that we have within us. We are very aware of likes and shares and, the vanity metrics about whether that's the basis on which you judge good engagement or not. But perhaps what you've not been aware of is actually neuroscience shows that people gain when they like somebody else's content. So if I'm liking content that's been put up by somebody else, it's not just them who gains from that like, I gain from it too. So again, there is this dopamine response that increases when I'm saying I like the content from other people. And I think that probably does feed back into the oxytocin. It makes me feel close and connected to people again. We talked a bit about cognitive engagement and getting people to feel part of it. So, having challenges, not finishing sentences, making content a bit puzzling so they have to actually engage in it. That's all really prominent. Using testimonials to demonstrate authority or shouting about any wins or any awards, things like that, again, are another way, because we respond automatically to authority. It's a real positive in terms of the way the brain responds, and it can cut through a lot of other noise. Reciprocity is a good one. So making sure that you offer things for people, whether it's a checklist or a download or a free fact sheet, something like that, they will naturally want to redress that balance. So reciprocity is an important principle that shouldn't be overlooked when it comes to social media content. If we want them to like or share our content, we need to give them something in return, or we need to give them something so they feel they want to give us those likes and shares in return. Scarcity is obviously a good one. It's that FOMO. And the most powerful way to use scarcity is to create the impression that there were lots at the start and now there aren't many left. If we create the impression there were never many, we have exclusivity, which triggers different elements within the brain. But scarcity, which is really motivating, it creates a sense of urgency, is if you think about having a cookie jar that had maybe 30 cookies in it for a start and there's only 4 left, actually that is more motivating than finding a whole cookie jar, or indeed a cookie jar which only started off with 4 in it. So it's that sense of they're running out, other people are taking them, I'm really going to be missing out here. So see how you can capture and harness some of that. And people. you know, people are so powerful for us. The images we use, the way that we can, as I've already mentioned, the way we can direct people's attention by where other people are looking, all of that is really prominent. If we can show people using our products or using our services, it already makes the user feel like they have engaged or connected with it. So it's a really great tool to use within reason. Just want to show you, there's a concept called mirror neurons, which is being debated at the moment, but it says that if you see people smile, so if you use imagery of people smiling, it actually makes you feel better and feel more positive. So who wants happy customers? Turns out quite a lot of people. By putting this smile imagery into logos, people are trying to create this neuroscience of mirror neurons and encouraging customers to be happy and to feel more positive towards their brands. And just to finish, I thought I'd show you a completely different take on social media within the brain. This was some research I was doing at the back end of 2019, and I'd done some research, had presented a lot of stimulations to somebody and was capturing their responses. And just as they finished, I said to them, would you mind if I take your photo for social media? And what happened from the outside was hesitation and a pause. And then she said, yeah, no, that would be fine. What happened inside her brain was something completely different. She went into complete meltdown, as you can see here. So each of the lines, each of the coloured lines is representing the activity from one of the sensors, and you can see it just absolutely spiked, kicking off all over the place, lots of different responses, which she then got back under control in that pause and then said, yeah. So I just thought it'd be interesting to show you, actually, sometimes when we're thinking about content and we're trying to capture people for content, this is what we may be doing to the inside of their brains. So proceed with caution. Finally, happy to answer any questions if people have them. Lots of ways for you to get in touch with me there. I have to say, I'm very new to Instagram. I was reading some research on it last week, which says in terms of cognitive engagement, Instagram actually is more compelling and more engaging than Facebook is. So I'm making a conscious effort on Instagram. At the moment, I have very little history, but if you want to watch what I'm going to start doing on there, please do connect on that. Otherwise, there's lots of other ways to get hold of me, or I'm happy to answer any questions that are coming up now.
Wow. Session. My brain is absolutely mind blown by all the insight that you've given us, Katie. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, talking about Instagram, before other people get their questions in, I'm very curious that you mentioned that Instagram is very uniquely designed to really trigger our brain, because I'm personally finding Instagram the most overwhelming and anxiety evoking platform from them all. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, even TikTok, I can handle that. But I've noticed recently that every time I go on Instagram in particular, even though on the surface it all looks pretty, it's beautiful colors, beautiful images, lots of lovely people, the content is quite positive there. But I notice Instagram is causing me the most anxiety. Can you think of a reason why Instagram could be actually causing the most kind of a pain response in the brain?
Well, as I say, I haven't been a huge user of Instagram, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. But the report that I was reading shows that the resource you have to give to observing Instagram or engaging with content in Instagram is phenomenally high compared to any of the other platforms. So whether that's somehow skewing the way you feel about it, whether you are aware of the fact it's draining you, and actually it is so much harder for you to engage and connect than some of the other platforms where you can sort of let that content wash over you and it isn't anything like so stimulating for you. As I say, I'm not a huge user, so I can't go any deeper than that, but it's certainly an area that the research shows very clearly at the moment that it's on a different level compared to all the other platforms. And some of what we want in terms of getting those memories and being able to aid people with recalling our product and our brand is that cognitive engagement. So I expect that there's going to be a lot more traction happening in that particular platform. I'm sorry, you don't want to hear that, do you?
No, it's okay. It's, any answer, any kind of clarity or guidance is always helpful. It's not like I can, change how Instagram is designed at work. We had a talk earlier about actually the mental health consequences of social media. So I think it's more about a reminder for myself and everyone to rewatch that talk and really be more conscious of how we use social media, how we allow it to impact us. But that's not the session for today. For today, there was one question that I wanted to ask again. It's any resources that you would have, be it a book or course, where we could, excited after today's sessions, where we could go and actually dig a little deeper into understanding how the brain works and how we can use it in marketing.
Of course. So probably the place to start is a book called The Psychology of Influence by Robert Cialdini. He uses a lot of the sort of consumer behavioral elements, and neuroscience was emerging when he first wrote that, but it's still the sort of go-to start point, definitely. Some of the neuroscience books are very scientific, and I think if you don't want to get into that, then they can be quite off-putting. But there are some lovely ones like Brainfluence, which are really digestible. Lots and lots of examples of content that you can use there. So yeah, there's quite a growing resource out there. There's all sorts of blogs and articles and things that you can pick up too. So I would absolutely say, get out there, get looking, get exploring, and try some of this, because I think that's the ultimate stuff. Is you've got to do a bit of trial and error, bit of split testing, try adopting some of these principles and see whether your audience engages differently, see what it triggers for your potential customers. So there is no categorical one size fits all. Even when we look at brains, we do have neurodiversity. So we know that people who have particularly things like ASD, who are on the autistic spectrum, or people with epilepsy, their brains process information in a totally different way. So we're not saying everybody's brain is exactly the same, and that comes again back down to the sort of evolution rather than design message.
Cool. We have a couple questions about the colors. And my colleague Dana is asking, would you say that blue is then a good color to associate with learning and education? Because we at Cambridge Social Media use lots of blue. So what would you think that the blue...
I feel very scared. Yeah, blue, as I say, blue stops you being so impulsive, but probably the other real thing about blue is it's associated with communication. I mean, if you think about LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, they are all different sort of methods of blue. So absolutely.
IBM, Dell, all the big companies, Microsoft, all of them lean towards the blue shades.
Absolutely. So whether it's the education side, whether it's the communication side, I would think blue is absolutely a great colour for you to be adopting. But you need to realise that means it's not going to be a sort of an impulse, a rash decision that people are making. So you need to sort of let them settle into it and then give them all the information to enable them to make that informed choice at their leisure.
That fits with us perfectly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Continuing on the color blue, there seems to be lots of interest. Someone's asking, in her studies, I often saw blue being used to attract attention, and here you have used it as well. Do you think there are any other colors that could have the similar effect to attract attention? You mentioned kind of red being really... And I know that if you think of kind of all the attention, it's a contrast of yellow and black. Any other colors?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head. We know that sort of in nature in particular, so again, coming back to our evolutionary past, it's those really strong primary colours that tend to capture your attention. So red, if they're berries, or if it's some horrific spider that's bright red, it tends to be nature's way of saying, proceed with caution, be alarmed. It attracts attention, definitely, but it's not pleasant to be around. It isn't something you want to sit in. So again, that's why I talk about fast food places. It's not easy to stay in a very red, high energy environment. Yellow as well. So yeah, you think about some of the signs that we see, some of the hazard signs in particular, they are that high intense yellow. And yeah, absolutely, the way they register in the brain is, again, it's an energized, it's a very buzzy, it's a very uplifting sort of positive color. So it's something that we do resonate quite well with. The more mixed colors, so some of the greens, again, you can get, because you're thinking about wavelength, if you get greens which have quite a lot of either yellow or red energy in them, then they can be quite attention grabbing. But a lot of the more natural colors of green that we would get are more blue, and so they are much more sort of calming and much more what we'd be used to seeing lots of in the environment around us.
Awesome, thank you. We have a question from Aliana, who has asked, how can we use neuroscience and understanding our brain to help our creative juices kick in when we're making content?
Good question. So this is sort of flipping it a bit. It's some of the same principles. So we want to be creating content. We want to be quite deliberate about it, and we talk about strategies, and I can almost see my brain shutting down as soon as I use words like strategy. So to be creative, what we need to do are give ourselves a chance for the brain to rest. So some of the things that we've learnt about the brain is, in particular, if you have something that you're really focusing on, if you've got a problem or an issue that you're trying to find the right answer to, very often taking a step away and giving yourself a break. It's the reason people say sleep on it, because actually when your brain has a chance to take the pressure off or take the foot off the pedal, in a word, it can then find a much more useful solution or a much better outcome or answer. So if we are trying to write content, then very often doing something that's different, whether it's going for a walk or whether it's just listening to some music and getting quite energized, these are things that will actually give your brain a chance to approach the situation from a different direction. And rather than just sitting staring at a screen or staring at a piece of paper trying to come up with ideas, take a step back and let your brain then find the more creative way through.
I love that. Absolutely. There are different techniques that we see are getting a lot more popular, from, connecting with nature, journaling, and mindfulness. And it all really is to get the brain to slow down, settle, have time to clean and really re-energize. And obviously we've learned that brain is a very, very busy, very complicated machine, and obviously it needs a little bit of a maintenance time.
It does. I mean, what we ask of our brains on a day-to-day basis is phenomenal. Not just the environments around us. And if you think, again, something else I was reading recently, that the intensity of what we see is really quite different now, because so much of it is up close. We're in closed environments, we're in rooms that don't, most of my rooms aren't particularly that cavernous, whereas in our evolutionary past we would have spent a lot of time outdoors where you can see the horizon, and the cues that our eyes give about how far away something is means we work much more intensively when things are up close. Mm-hmm. So the fact that most of what we see isn't that far away from us, again, is draining for our brains. So we expect a huge amount. Having something here for hours of the day as we're reading or scrolling through our phones or on our laptops is very draining. So yeah, you're right. The more we can just give our brain a chance to recover from all of that, give it a chance to almost reset, find some solutions for us, find a better outcome for us, and then it feels like we're sort of working in partnership with it rather than battling it on a on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, have last question, very interesting, from Michelle, asking, is there a particular language style that helps encourage engagement? Because obviously for everyone on social media, engagement is a holy grail.
Yeah. Again, it's hard to say one thing that fits for everybody, but the more you can make it personal, the more you can make it resonate to that particular person and about them, then the easier that engagement is going to be. So some things, asking a question, for instance, how are you feeling today? That's, you're asking me, so that straight away cuts through some of the noise. And it's incredible how our brains want to naturally answer a question like that. We don't like leaving things open-ended. So questions are always a great tool for creating engagement. And if you make it about them, then that's a sort of double win. Again, it depends what you're trying to achieve. So if you start with that emotion in mind of what you want them to do, then the language will help to sort of change the direction that you want to take. So some language is very upbeat and encouraging and motivational, and other language is much more sedate and subdued. So it's about finding the right balance for your audience, and that's really where some of the split tests and things like that are going to be useful. But on a generic level, there's just a couple of suggestions there that I hope they help.
I absolutely love this response, because knowing who you're targeting, who are the people you're trying to talk to, and then asking them questions and listening to what they say and paying attention to what language they use. I know that especially marketers, we are way too used to our own lingo and our own world, and we're not thinking if other people actually understand what we mean by certain jargon, by certain phrases. If the way we would explain something is the way that our customers would be asking for it. So asking questions even around the product, around the industry, around the service, and then genuinely listening and paying attention to keywords and phrases and language that your customers are using, and using that in your marketing is, from my experience, the best language style to use. It's their language style.
Absolutely it is. And you can get, great traction if you start doing blogs based on that or FAQs based on that, because you get your SEO, because you're actually using the sort of terminology and the language that people are searching for. So you don't just demonstrate a real understanding of the issues as they, being your customers, perceive them, but you're actually answering them in their own terminology, in language which feels very comfortable and familiar to them. So it will just serve you so well in terms of building that rapport and that relationship.
Wow, fantastic. I could talk with you for hours and hours, but there is one final comment that I wanted to show from Victoria, which says that this is the best talk we ever had. And, I have to agree, because we had lots of fantastic talks, but really getting to understand the person, the human underneath the business and the marketing, because we can often go straight for the tactics and we can go even for strategies, but it still works with the human, with a person, a real complex system below it, and having a better understanding of it for ourselves, for businesses, for marketing. I think it's such a valuable thing. So thank you, Katie, for a brilliant session.
You're welcome. I mean, that is the absolute core of what I try to do. Is I love marketing, but sometimes I do get frustrated by how much we talk about algorithms and processes and automation. And I just want to champion the customer and put the human right back in the center of it, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And the more sophisticated these algorithms and automation get, the more the differential is going to lie in that human and the way we are able to communicate and connect with each other. So that's music to my ears. Thank you, Lenka. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you for your questions and for your comments. And one last reminder that the super early bird ticket to this year's virtual Cambridge Social Media Day, the offer is available only until Monday. Then the ticket price will go up. And if you want to take all of your marketing to the next level, plus meet some lovely people, have a chance to network and ask questions to experts, then you should join us in October. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Katie, for being here. And I'll see you at the next video. Bye.
Bye-bye.